Excellent. Linda, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
Well, I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Me too. So, I want to begin our journey, and I always ask this up front. I've tried to put this question to rest, but it's just too big with COVID. Getting through that time period in 2020, it created so many changes for all of us. How did you get through that time period, and how has it reverberated into what you do now in 2025?
Well, I probably have not a typical story. My husband and I, actually, at the very start of COVID, were starting on a road trip, and we stopped in Philadelphia that had like the first 20 cases while we were there, and we didn't even know what was happening. Um, and we were supposed to stop and see his son, and he said, "You can't come here." When we called to meet, and we said, "Why not?" We thought he was sick, and he said, "Have you not been watching the news?" So anyway, we decided to turn around, um, came back, and kind of took stock and decided that we were going to live a really healthy life. So we would go out to the country every day and find some kind of secluded place where we could go walking. And we probably ate a lot healthier than a lot of people because we used to eat out too much. So um, we tried to really be conscious about what we were doing, um, and it was just a difficult situation for everybody. I have a very large family, and there was kind of some, disagreements about what quarantining meant. Um, so that's how we got through the first year. My husband, um, in just about exactly, well, when the vaccinations first came out, he had just been diagnosed with a very rapid moving cancer. Um, and I question whether they would have caught it if the healthcare system hadn't been so overwhelmed. But he died a month after they told us that he had cancer.
Wow.
So I lost my husband in February of 21.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Right now, if I was to put you in front of a bunch of kids at career day for them to get a handle on your career and what you do, the kid in the back of the room is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" What's your answer?
It's funny that you should ask because I started out as a career counselor in school.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, I right now am writing. I've authored a book and an article and another book. Um, so I guess I would consider myself an author now. Um, my purpose in life, I've always known. I was lucky because I always knew what my purpose in life was from the time I was a teenager. And a lot of kids, especially high achieving kids, I get excited by so many things.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how I was going to pursue it, but I knew I wanted to be a helper, and I knew that I grew up in a very loving family with lots of great siblings, and I knew that a lot of people didn't have that advantage. And so I wanted to kind of help even the playing field for people. So I pursued a lot of careers in my life. I was a social worker, and then I was a Red Cross director, and then I went back for my graduate degree in counseling and became a school counselor, and worked with a lot of students. So all of that with the goal of kind of helping people to figure it out and to have a good life and make good decisions and see the rewards of that. I retired, and during COVID and the year after my husband died, I took a writing workshop and I started writing this book. So that took me through the rest of COVID. It took me a couple of years.
But was that cathartic in that time of loss and grieving to be able to write and to be able to do that? Was that kind of a way of dealing with grief, maybe?
Um, it's really kind of funny. It informed my writing, but um, the book is about my being in therapy,
Yeah.
and um, I had I had suffered a trauma when I was in my 20s. I didn't deal with it for 20 years. And then when I was in my graduate courses, the beginning of when I was 39, I was triggered with PTSD. And so I had to start therapy. I was I was married to the father of my boys. At that time, our marriage was struggling. I was working full time and in college and going to therapy. So it was a really difficult time for 5 years where I struggled through I struggled through therapy with some really serious PTSD symptoms and depression and anxiety. Um, so so the book is about all of that. However, I will say that the book is titled Braving Therapy because the therapy is hard, especially for PTSD.
Yeah.
Revisiting traumas that were so upsetting and uncomfortable that you didn't want to deal with them, and having to finally deal with them is really tough. And the goal is to stick it out until you get through it and be able and are able to process it all. And I did that. Um, and part of the therapy that I had to deal with was that my husband at the time and I were, as much as we loved each other, a real mismatch. And we ended up divorcing, um, and having a much better relationship and family relationship afterwards. But I met my husband that I married 3 or 4 years later. Um, After that, and he met his wife as well. Really good relationships in those second relationships, and it was probably a result. He was getting therapy too of figuring things out.
Yeah.
But the book was definitely it kept me really busy,
Yeah.
and I'm a really involved person anyway, so I'm really busy. But I think that my goal was that I didn't feel like I was completely done with the experience until I passed along my learning,
Yeah.
which goes along with everything that I've ever done. The purpose is to pass along my learning, pass along the things that I've figured out. So that's really what I was doing. It wasn't so much cathartic as it was just now I'm done with it. Although now I have to market it. So
Yeah, right. It's just the beginning of another ventricle that goes off of it. So let me ask you this: I'm thinking back to my memories of counselors in my life, and there's so many things that they impart on people. What has been one of the best success stories of somebody that you counseled that came back to you and they had good things happen in their life? Have you ever gotten a letter or something like that?
I had quite a few of them.
Yeah.
Um, and probably my favorite story is of a young woman who I started working with as soon as she got to high school. And things were really difficult for her. Everything that could go wrong was going wrong. She had PTSD um, from abuse issues. She was into drugs. She was she was involved in a very detrimental and probably illegal relationship, and she uh, she came to me a lot, and we finally started getting her into programs. I got her placed in probably four of the five outpatient, or not outpatient, inpatient programs that she went to, and finally the last one, her parents had to mortgage their house to put her in it, um, but we corresponded even while she was in that, and I worked with her entire 4 years of high school. But she came back 6 months, less than 6 months before her class was graduating. and we got her in classes in the local community college to finish her high school career
Yeah.
so that she didn't have to come back into the high school and deal with any students that were bad influences on her. And she graduated with her class, which was her whole goal because everybody always said she wouldn't. And she is an extremely successful young woman. She's got kids. She is very involved with her church. She's got a wonderful husband who was another one of my students. And so I'm thrilled. And she introduced me at her wedding. She would introduce me as this is the woman that saved my ass. So that's how she introduced me to people.
That's awesome.
So that was wonderful. I had some other, I would have some other emails sometimes of kids that were struggling. It was funny because I my oldest son is a very successful engineer. He's with Google. And when he was in second grade, his teacher called me in and she said, he daydreams. We have math tests. He's looking out the window. And so I saw her when she was in her late 80s at an ice cream shop. And I went up to her and I said, I just want you to know my son is doing so well now. He's an engineer and he's very successful. And she looked at me and she said, was he a good boy? And I said, oh, yes, he was a very good boy. And she said, I'm sorry, dear, but I don't remember the good ones. And that I've said that to teachers, and they say yes, because we have to work so hard with those students that really need you. And those are all of the students that I really remember are the
Yeah.
ones that were in my office a lot and that I had to really work hard to bring them along.
So you've had this capacity of being beacons for people. Who has that been for you? Who's been an inspiration or a hero for you in your life?
Um, I would, I have a lot actually. I would say that both of my parents were amazing people who um, were very loving, but set the bar pretty high for us. Um, and I really admire all of my siblings for everything that they've done, and my late husband. Um, he he was brilliant, and for all of the healing that I did through therapy, I think when I really became um, comfortable with myself, like I stopped finally with the beating myself up and the negative self talk through him. He was an amazing person. I don't know how he was able to be as involved in as many things as he was, but he was quite something. And the funny thing is, when you talk about grief, I felt when I was stunned when I met him and fell in love. It was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I've met this amazing person that's just right for me. And we both had that feeling about each other. And I was I was not happy with him that he died,
Yeah.
and that we got a chance to talk about it quite a bit in that last month. And he said to me, we've done everything that we said we wanted to do. We've lived the life that we said we wanted to live. And I thought to myself, my God, he's right. I should have put more things on the list. But I felt grateful when he died for that I had him in my life.
Yeah.
Like I was grief stricken and I missed him, but I never stopped being grateful. And people said you're going to get depressed, and I waited to be depressed, and I wasn't. I was just so grateful that I had him. I still missed him. I still miss him, but I'm so grateful that he came into my life.
It's interesting how we process grief. I remember one of my favorite animals I ever had. One of the first real animals I had as an adult was a sweetheart of a dog. Her name was Coco, and when she passed, everybody in the house, there was three generations of women that were really worried about how I was going to respond. And I was grief stricken, but I was like that. I was so grateful. And I had explained to my wife, if this dog hadn't come into my life, that would be a problem. But the fact that it happened and from beginning to end, it was such a great, wondrous, and she was so good with my son. My son's on the spectrum. It was like a therapy dog for him. There were so many wonderful things, and that was the thing. The dog Coco radiated so much joy to everybody. How can you be upset? And I think that's a weird Western mentality that we have about how we process death. And you go through stages of it, but I see a lot of it as a celebration if it's a good life lived.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking that first couple of years when I was first writing, I was thinking, I'm going to write a book and it's going to say, spoiler alert, everybody dies in
Yeah,
the end.
right.
Everybody dies in the end.
Yep, that's it. That's it.
um, yeah, yeah. And actually, when the pulmonologist, and of course it was COVID, so we were having a virtual meeting when she was giving him the results of his PET scan, which was the first indication that he had um, cancer that had metastasized. And he said, so you're telling me that I'm going to die? And she said, yes, unfortunately. And I was sitting listening to this conversation thinking, well, of course you're going to die. We all die. And we talked about it afterwards. And it was like, it's a matter of, is it going to be soon, or do you get a lot of time? And
Yeah,
we kind of still carried that torch for quite a while, that
yeah,
maybe it would be a lot of time.
yeah.
So
So, after this life that you've lived, everything that you've done and accomplished, if you were to have a dream tonight and run into the 18-year-old version of you, ready to charge out into the world and do it, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on all of this wisdom you've accumulated along your journey, what advice would you impart on that young version of you?
well, i I had a strong feeling from the time I started college that I needed to find a career that I loved, because it seemed to me, I tended bar from the time I was 18. And so I dealt with a lot of people who'd come in after work and were miserable and would spend their money. And I had this feeling that if I found a career that I loved, that it wouldn't matter if I made a lot of money, because I would be happy in my life. And that people who work to make a lot of money and aren't happy at what they do then go out and need a lot of money to spend a lot of money during their free time. And I could see that that wasn't the road I wanted to take. And I think if I were to go back, there were a couple things I think I would say. One is that I was right, that that living a life that where you're doing stuff that is important to you and that you care about and love is so fulfilling that you don't have to do a lot of other things to distract yourself from working a job you don't like. And the other thing that I think I would tell myself is that my philosophy of life now is that we get to be on this grand adventure for however long we're here. And the times that we learn the most and grow the most are the really, really hard times. And that is really the purpose of this adventure, is
Yeah,
to learn and to grow. And that doesn't come from having it easy. It doesn't come from being comfortable. It comes from going through the hard stuff and plowing into it and getting through it and seeing it through. And that's where we that's if we do it that way, if we don't run from the hard stuff, but we we plunge in, that's where we have our growth.
Yeah, that's totally true. Let me ask you this. If you were to walk into a room and everybody that you've worked with throughout the years, all the kids that you've been around, everyone that's known you in this professional capacity, and you could tell that room one fun story about you. The first concert you went to, jumping out of an airplane, outrunning a bear, some kind of fun story that might humanize you in a different way. What story would you tell that room of people?
Well, I've been around a long time. I probably have a lot, but I think um, I took a scuba diving class when I lived in Florida when I was in my 20s, and I think diving in Crystal River in Florida was a real thrill. I have a recollection of being down 40 feet under the water with everybody else from the class and the crazy instructor that we had. And um, my diving partner was a pretty big guy, and um, he lost his mouthpiece, and it started like bubbling up. And I mean, we were 40 feet down, and I was next to him, and I took my mouthpiece out, and the instructor was right there. I took my mouthpiece out and I shared it with him, which is what we'd been taught to do. And then we pulled his mouthpiece back and gave it to him, and he was breathing again, but he used up his oxygen a lot more quickly than I did, and so we had to surface, but we continued to share my mouthpiece, until he was set again. And that exact same trip is that crazy instructor took us novices through a cave that is apparently advanced diving. It turned off the flashlight while we were in there, so we were in the complete blackness
Oh,
for
wow.
just a few seconds, and then turned it back on. And yeah, it was quite an experience. I discovered probably later on that he was. I won't say anything about him other than when I went to his dive shop to pick up my permanent certification. He had been gone for a month. He hadn't come back. And the guy that worked there said, well, he flew down to South America and we haven't heard from him since. And so that was in the late 70s in Florida. So I had my own assumptions about what he was doing flying down to to South America. I never saw him again. I didn't get my permanent certification.
Wow, that's wild. I mean, that almost seems like being in that area. It almost seems like you're back in embryonic fluid. You're like in like pre like birth
Yeah.
stage. That's wild. That's just totally
Yeah.
wild. So let me ask you this: of everything that you've done, accomplished, and evolved into and lived through in your life, what are you the proudest of?
Oh, I think I'm really proud of my boys. They all have wonderful wives and grandchildren. My stepsons and their families the same. I mean, my involvement with the family that I have is just I'm so lucky and I'm so grateful. Um, but I think that I'm also pretty pleased with the things that I've learned and figured out, the kind of enlightenment that I've had. I'm really proud of this book. Um, I didn't say what the book was really about, but I was raped when I was living alone in my 20s in Florida, and was triggered in PTSD, as I said. And that was a long time dealing with that. And I went through some really dark times once the PTSD was triggered, and things seemed to be melting down. I went through some severe depression and anxiety. I lost the joy in my life.
Yeah.
And I would say that to people. I would say, I was so depressed, but it was like, and I don't feel joy at all. And I really miss that. And when I got through the therapy, when I dealt with all of the stuff I was hiding, um, the joy started to come back.
Yeah.
And then my husband and I met, and I was incredulous that I had met him. We got married and did a lot of traveling to Europe, and just a fun life together. But we bought a little shabby cottage on Lake Ontario in upstate New York, and I was sitting out front one day, and it's a it's cottagey, but it's kind of shabby chic. And I was sitting out front by the water one day, and it was a warm day, and the water was calm. And I came in and I said to him, "I'm just feeling so grateful. It's kind of an odd feeling." And he said to me, "You've worked really hard, and you take care of a lot of other people. You should be able to feel gratitude." And I said, "It's not that. I finally feel in my life like I don't need other things. I've got the warm sun shining on me. I'm sitting next to this beautiful scenery, and I can finally start to appreciate the stuff that I've got rather than wanting more." And I think there were a lot of periods in my life that I kept thinking about more and more and more. If I get this, if I do this,
Hmm.
um, then I'll be happy. I'll
Yeah.
be happier. And I finally just realized that I needed to turn my focus on the wonderful things that were in my life. And the funny thing about my book is I wrote about the process of being in therapy. And I wrote about the kind of stuff that you think about that you don't want to talk about. And I did a lot of that. My therapist was very good. He put me in charge of what I was going to talk about. So a lot of times I didn't say anything because all I could think was, if I pick the topic, he's going to know the kind of things I think about. And I wanted to be able to control what other people thought of me. So I wrote about what I was thinking about in all of those different parts of therapy, and how healing happens, and how perspectives change, and how when I finally would start talking about things and then we would have a conversation about it, my perspective would change. And and that's the learning that comes from it. And what was kind of amazing to me, I was intimidated to put the book out, especially to people I knew. And nobody talked about my particular situation. What they talked about was that same feeling of keeping things to themselves, of beating themselves up, of ruminating on all of the stupid things that they think they do, and on just keeping with their own perspective. And that what I finally talk about in the book, and what I've said, is that when you don't share what's in your head, the only perspective you're getting is your own.
Yeah.
And people connect with that, and people write about that in their reviews and talk about that. When I was doing author talks, I would see very accomplished people shaking their head yes. As a school counselor, the most accomplished and active students, the top students, were the ones who would have those ruminating thoughts, beating themselves up.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, a kid might say to me what they were telling themselves, or their parent would call and say, "They seem kind of depressed. I don't know what's going on." And it's something that I think, especially with high achieving people, they start pretty early in life. Somebody corrects you, and then you go to town on yourself.
Yeah.
So that was a big message in the book, that it is so important. Those thoughts are so toxic,
Yeah.
and it's so important to talk.
Yeah.
And I recently went through a small bout of depression, and I see my therapist maybe once a year. And I went to see him because it had gotten really bad. And he was like, "This stuff. You've written about this stuff." And it was like, "Yeah, but I just can't get past the chaos in my head right now.
Yeah.
Like, It's still, it doesn't change. When you feel depressed, things feel chaotic and you can't really put your finger on it. But we talked and we talked, and I finally said, I was listening to another podcaster, and he said, when I'm depressed, I don't say anything to anybody because I've got a lot of people care about me, but I don't want to be love bombed when I'm feeling depressed.
Yeah.
And I said that to him. I said, it's like I have a lot of people that care about me. I don't want to be love bombed. And he said, towards the end of our session, oh, well, then why don't you tell them what you do need from them? And I was like, oh, what a good idea. It's like suddenly I felt better. And I went and I texted people that I knew I was going to be with. And I said, I've been feeling pretty depressed lately, and it will be really good to spend time with you and do some talking. And I kind of threw my hat over the ring through texts because that's easier than saying it. And I've been feeling pretty fine since then.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a constant maintenance kind of thing. I don't deal with major depression anymore, but I do have to remember. And a lot of times when something upsets me a lot or I feel embarrassed about something, I remind myself that I need to talk to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So I'm going to put a link to the book in the show notes. Is there another website? Is there any other place that people can contact you?
I am on Facebook.
Okay.
It's under the book is written under L. Feig Knipe.
Okay.
And my Facebook, my author Facebook page is L. Feig Knipe. And I also have a website, which is lfeigknipe.com.
Okay. I will put all of that in the show notes. This has been wonderful. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much, Joe. It was good talking with you.
Great talking to you. Take care.
Looking to get new clients to your business through cold calling or email marketing? At Agency Y, they envision a world in which small and big companies have equal chances to win new customers in the market. Their purpose is to bring parity and reduce the gap between large and small firms with the help of their cold calling and cold email marketing services. Use the code Joe Dimino 10 at www.agencyyy.org/coldcallingjoe.php or www.agencyyy.org/emailmarketingjoe.php to get 10% off your first order. This is Joe Dimino of Neon Jazz and Famous Interviews, and I stand behind Agency Y to meet your business dreams.